Folks, you know the drill. This is Conservation and Science podcast, where we take a deep dive into topics of ecology, conservation, and human-wildlife interactions. And I'm Tommy Serafinsky, and I always try to bring you diverse perspectives and diverse opinions on the topics that I cover. And that means that sometimes you might disagree with views and opinions you hear on this podcast, but that's okay because we need a more dialogue and understanding and less division and fighting. And today we continuing with a topic that sparks particularly a lot of emotions and maybe divisive, and that is the coexistence with large carnivores. And last week, in the last episode, which is 2 weeks ago, we talked about living with lynx. And today we are going to talk specifically about wolves. And our guest is the author of the book, Living with Wolves. Here's the chapter. Here's the cover. Ecological anthropologist and field philosopher Thorsten Gieser. Thorsten, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me once again. I'm happy to be here and talk about a new topic.
That's absolute pleasure. And folks, you might not know, Thorsten was our guest in episode 195. Where we talked about environmental stewardship and hunting, or whether hunting can or cannot foster that environmental stewardship. And at the time, I think it was after we finished recording, we start talking about wolves, and Thorsten said like, hey, I have a book about wolves, living with wolves, affects, feelings, and sentiments in Human-Wolf Coexistence. And folks, as usual, the link to the book is in the description of the show, and you can get it there. And if you get it there through those links, you will support my work because I will get a teensy commission from every sale. So, Thorsten, wolves, and this is where it all started last time, the wolves are very special, not maybe, in my opinion, ecologically, because wolves, lynx, bear, these are large carnivores that we deal with in the European specifically context, also North America. But wolves have a special place, not only ecologically, but mythologically, psychologically, emotionally in humans. And I guess this is one of the things that you're dealing with your book. You took the approach and you're talking about affective dimensions. Could you please lay it out to us? Like, what is this angle that you took in your book? Because you spend a lot of time explaining your methodology in the book and so on.
Yeah. So I call it the affective dimensions of the human-wolf relationship. I could have perhaps opted for the more the easier version of kind of understanding emotions in coexistence. But the problem with emotions is when we think about emotions, we already have this psychological conception of emotion in our heads. So we think something about emotions as something that is kind of deeply inside of us as individuals. And this is it's of course kind of how we understand emotions usually. But it's also, for me, coming more from the humanities, it's only one side of what emotions are about. And there's actually so much more going on about emotions. So it's not just about something that goes on deep inside of us and as individuals, but it's also something that is in between us, in between us as human beings. So there's a social dimension to emotions. And it's something that happens in all our relationships, even our relationship to landscape, to our homeland, relationship with different kinds of animals. So basically, it's something that kind of defines and emerges out of relationships, basically. And it's also not just individual and not just between kind of two beings, but it's also something that can take on another dimension when there's something forming like what we would call a mood or an atmosphere. Yeah, so something that goes beyond us as individuals, something that kind of is seeping through the landscape and so on, and giving everything a kind of emotional tone. Yeah, just like when we go to a party and we say, oh, that's a really good mood in here. Yeah. So there's something happening, just not just inside people, but also amongst them. Yeah. And this is for me what it means kind of to coexist. It's also sharing an emotional landscape in some way, and of different kinds of emotion interacting with each other, mixing with each other, sometimes contradicting each other, challenging each other. So there's a whole lot of emotional dynamics going on all around us. Yeah, and this is what we need to consider actually when we talk about coexistence. Yeah, it's not just these pragmatic questions of how to protect herds or how to maintain a certain population size of the predator. Or even about kind of all this cultural baggage that we have that you mentioned in the beginning. Yeah, so there's so much more going on, which is a real dynamic. And by choosing this word affect, it's a kind of a term that includes all these different dimensions. And also, most importantly, when we talk about ethics, kind of in the humanities and the social sciences, we usually mean something that affects us. So it's a kind of a force, something going on. Yeah. So like you see a wolf and something in you responds. Yeah. So this is what it means to be affected. Yeah. So you have a response. This could be just kind of a tingling of your hair, getting goosebumps. Yeah. It could be kind of a feeling in your stomach. Or it could be kind of that what we understand then as a fully formed emotion, which is kind of we're fascinated or we are perhaps a bit scared. Yeah. So this is what it means to be affected. And this is the starting point where emotions begin to form and to develop and to do something with us that we have to respond to.
Yeah, there's many things because like what you said is people often talk about links, right? It's great to have links and knowing it's there, even though I will never see the links, surely, because they're so secretive and so on. So I guess this is what you're talking about, this emotional thing, just knowing they are there. And this is coming up quite often. Or like you said, ethical aspects. Some people in Ireland argue that bringing back wolves to Ireland would be an act of decolonization because that was British who killed all the wolves and so on and so forth. But I feel like in case of wolves, that is just to the detriment of the animal and of the relation, because I think that these affects, these emotional landscapes are making that coexistence so much more difficult in terms of wolves. Would you agree with that? And why is that wolves are so special for us?
Well, I would say there are kind of two sides to that question. The one side is kind of the effects that come from the wolves directly and from us interacting with wolves. And the other side is what's going on between us humans within society, between different groups, between different stakeholders. And what is so typical about wolves and less so about other animals like lynx is that it's really mixed up, these two levels. Yeah. And the problem that I addressed in my book and that I identified is that in the literature, we really separated out these two dimensions. Yeah. And so we have kind of ecologists, we have natural scientists working on the real animal and everything to do with that. And we have the social scientists, on the other hand, working with the so-called human dimensions. Yeah. And the presumption behind that is basically that kind of the real wolves, they don't matter for what's going on in our society. Yeah. It's basically only what the wolf represents. Yeah, as in terms of its symbolism of the stories or narratives that we tell, kind of the cultural context, and that all that can be separated from what wolves actually do. But of course, everyone who knows wolves and who knows coexistence knows that you can't separate it out. It's a web of relationships. Yeah. So in coexistence, we are all in there together. Yeah. It's not like what you also mentioned in your last conversation with Johnny Hansen. It's not this old view that we have of that wild animals are somewhere else in wilderness that is separate from where humans dwell. But actually, coexistence means we are all in it together somehow. Yeah. Whether living, you call it living together or living alongside or living next to each other. But basically, it's about relationships. So we have to take both of these sides into account. Yeah. And then, of course, there are some problems why wolves are special. And the one is kind of from our historical baggage, so that we have this centuries of continued, I would even call it warfare with wolves. So this extinction campaigns that we had in many parts of Europe. You just mentioned what happened in Ireland, but it's also happened in other parts of Europe as part of a nation building and a part of a civilization building, in part also as a longer Christianization process, where the wolf had a very negative image. So we have all that negative image of the wolf in many European countries. And only in the 20th century, probably in the second half only, we have this new understanding of a positive wilderness and of positive wild animals. Kind of the new ideas of how we relate to nature, which you find underlying conservation, rewilding movements, and so on and so on. So this is the reason, and of course, this is still active. It's still there. We have both now. We have both kind of this positive understanding in most European countries of wilderness and wild animals such as wolves. But we also have these older notions, this typical view of that humans are kind of in power and they are the ones who are supposed to bring order to natural processes, especially when it comes to regional and local levels. Yeah, so it's humans that actually are the ones who were supposed to be in power over wild animals. So these are still there. But the other thing is that the wolves themselves, they also play a role in these images. So these images of the wolf and also the negative images of wolves, they don't come from nowhere. They don't come out of the blue. They have a basis in wolf behavior too. Yeah. Of course, not in every dimension, but there is a core about what wolves do and how they live, and especially how they hunt and kill, which makes them really special and stand out. Yeah. So if you know how wolves kill, and also kind of other canids, basically, it's sometimes not really nice. Yeah. So the way they hunt and kill can appear cruel to us. Yeah. And especially when it comes to surplus killing. So when wolves kill more than they could actually eat in that particular moment. Yeah. So when they kill 20, 30 sheep in one night, for example. So there is a basis for seeing them as cruel animals who seem to kill more than they actually need, which could seem unnatural even. And kind of these two levels, they seem to mix all the time. Not so much in places like Ireland or the UK where the wolves are extinct now for quite a long time. You just basically, you have the stories from somewhere else. But and it was the same in Germany until the year 2000. We just had the stories about wolves from far away. But now, people living in the countryside where the wolves are, they know they have these experiences of how it is like, or what it is like when wolves go hunting sheep and when they kill them, when they injure them, and so on. And these new experiences with wolves, they become mixed up with these more traditional stories that you know about wolves, but also becoming mixed up what you know from science and from documentaries and so on. So it's in Germany, we're living at a time now in the past 25 years where all these things become mixed up now. People gain experiential knowledge of wolves for the very first time, but it's still at the very beginning of coexistence. And this is kind of what is so difficult and why there's such a dynamic in there. And this is also why it is so emotional, because everything is new, everything is in movement, everything is changing, and that, of course, causes a lot of uncertainty, and this is the time where emotions boil over.
Yeah, and people usually don't like change, especially if the change is perceived as a negative one. You have in your book a lot of very hands-on, let's say, stories and experiences, and one that I remember very, very vividly is when you were on the kill site with the wolf kill expert, and I took from the descriptions that the atmosphere, which is something that you're talking about in your book, the atmosphere was very tense. Could you tell us, like, how did, like, I'm curious to hear that firsthand, what was in the air when you guys showed up there?
Yeah, I mean, the context in which I bring this story is it's basically kind of a discussion of this claim that you often hear that people in the countryside, when wolves have returned, that they have to live in fear. It's something that you hear all over the place, not just in Germany, but up to the United States, everywhere. And I wanted to understand a little bit more what that might mean, actually, to live in fear when you live in wolf territory. And kind of maybe the events that most emblematically stand for this fear is actually the kill sites of domestic animals, mostly of sheep. So I accompanied one of the wolf management's official experts to the site. She got a phone call early in the morning that there was a wolf attack on sheep. And the thing was, it was the third attack within 3 months on that same flock of that same shepherd. And in the first one, he had already lost more than 30 sheep in one night. So we were called to him. And he was in one of these villages where there were a lot of attacks for more than 5 years now. It was the home of the so-called Rosenthal pack, and with quite a famous wolf. They were quite a notorious pack for killing sheep, and it was kind of the center also of kind of resistance growing for wolves. So we knew that it was a really hot area in terms of the politics that went on and of feelings kind of arising on and on a previous occasion, the same expert, she was there and she was kind of verbally attacked by people standing there, because kind of she represented wolf management and people were really angry because nothing happened and the wolves could continue attacking sheep and so on. And this was kind of the context. And this is why it was a little bit tense from the very beginning. So it was this atmospheres, they are situated within a whole process, basically. Yeah, there's much that comes from past events and encounters. Yeah, and this already gave a certain emotional tone to what was happening right there on this day. So we arrived there and we were greeted by the wife of the shepherd, and she took us to the meadow. And before we went there was already kind of a cage standing there with a wounded sheep that had some of his flesh torn away from one of his hind legs, just standing there apathically, just not doing anything, just standing there, but kind of full of this wound. And then we were going into the meadow, and there was kind of the surviving sheep. They were all kind of huddled together, standing kind of at the end. And there was one of the sheepdogs kind of running around and then kind of chasing away a few ravens that were kind of feasting on one of the carcasses.
How long after the attack you guys arrived there?
I was just kind of 4 hours or so after the attack.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just walked around the meadow trying to get a sense what actually the situation is, and seeing how many dead sheep there are. So we found a few partially eaten sheep lying around. We saw kind of the bloody entrails kind of crisscrossing over the meadow, bits of wool lying everywhere. It already began to stink a little bit, the carcasses and kind of the flies circling around it. There was a dead sheep lying in a stream right next to it. And yeah, we were walking with the wife of the shepherd, and she was really quiet. Didn't say a lot. Then her husband came in. He just got kind of a small machine to pick up the carcasses and remove them. And he was the same, really kind of taciturn, hardly saying anything. And there was this kind of sense of hopelessness, powerlessness. It's just kind of why does this happen? Yeah, and the expert kind of started kind of measuring teeth marks and taking swabs and everything. And but what really is what we couldn't understand is when we kind of walked around there is that that we saw, yes, there was an electric fence on there, but the whole side of the stream, more than 100 meters basically, wasn't fenced at all. Yeah. And it was a really small stream, just kind of 2 or 3 meters or so. And there was no fence at all. And it was the third attack in 3 months. And they have had wolf attacks in this village for more than 5 years. Yeah. And we knew he wouldn't get compensation without a proper fence there. Yeah. And when I asked him, he was like, even with a fence, what's the difference? Yeah. My neighbor over there, he had an attack last week and he had a fence. So, but you wouldn't get compensation. Yeah. Shrugged his shoulders and was nothing. Yeah. It was like, also, he gave up a few months after that, stopped with sheep. So there was kind of this sense of really hopelessness in there. The sheep were still really scared. Then there were kind of neighbors from the village coming in when they saw us getting around there, when they saw the big car from the wolf management. So they started talking with the shepherds. There were kind of a young father coming in with his small kid. And they were looking at everything, and so I mean, more and more people were coming, and you could kind of sense that it might get a little bit difficult. So we tried to wrap up and drive off again as soon as all the paperwork was done. Yeah, so this is that was kind of a typical event when you go to some of these sites. I went to others as well. But this one was the one with the most sheep killed. And then you could just see that there was kind of a lot going on. It wasn't just fear. Fear was kind of perhaps the least thing going on there. Yeah, so it was mostly kind of this depressing feelings, these feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness, maybe also of anger towards the wolf management, towards wolves, some sympathy with the dead sheep, of course, with the neighbors coming in, their sympathy for the shepherds. Yeah, so there was a lot going on that kind of made up this atmosphere.
And was that area where the wolves naturally colonized? That's entire Germany, right? There was no
exactly. Yeah.
Wolves.
So what you have to know about Germany is that there was no introduction of wolves. They all came back by themselves. From Western Poland, basically, and some from the Alpine population, France, Italy. So there was no reintroduction program.
So that is straight away against, because the conventional wisdom says that if the wolves are naturally going to colonize, then the conflict will be lower. Because on one hand, you don't have as much of this human on human, let's call it this way, element, right? Of like, oh, it's your wolf, you introduced them. You in air quotes, obviously. And at the same time, there is also, I think there is some peer-reviewed science to back the thesis that wolves that are colonizing naturally, they tend to get less in trouble, less in conflict with humans, because they're naturally trying to figure out, and they don't want to too much conflict themselves. Do you think that your experiences are telling you that this is not entirely true, or is it like, wow, that thing would be totally off the chart if the wolves were reintroduced there?
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be a different kind of situation. Yeah, I mean, I can only speculate that the conflicts would be even worse. But what I also see is that, especially among those who oppose wolves, so especially in the farming and hunting community, for them, you often hear the argument, and then that's not a particular German thing. You hear that all over the place, also in other countries. Even when the wolves come back by themselves, people suspect that they were introduced. And so there are all these stories. I mean, in Germany there was this funny story about that the border police actually got hold of a whole truck full of wolves at the border. So seemingly conservationists tried to sneak in the wolves. We always knew it. And it was a big story in one of the biggest hunting magazines. And then the police intervened and said, well, actually, I mean, we found a truck, and we stopped the truck full of wolves, but it was a truck full of bikes called Steppenwolf. Yeah. So, but these are all these stories. I mean, I heard even kind of these rumors from some Greek island where people had these rumors about wolves being dropped by parachute from planes to the island. Yeah. So
I heard a story like, so the ones I heard was like the black helicopters who are dropping wolves, and I think in Norway, blue Volkswagen camper vans are the ones to watch out for those. And this is just like,
this is the big problem. I mean, so from that point of view, for those people who are very involved in anti-wolf activism, for them this was an introduction. Yeah, this was no natural recolonization. The question, of course, is do people really believe it? And I think kind of partially they do, yes, but partially it's also a political argument. Yeah, it's supposed to diminish the status of the wolves. They are not real wolves. They are only introduced. They are probably from an enclosure. It's a bit similar like these other stories about wolf hybrids. That what we have in Germany, they are not real wolves. They are all hybrids, and therefore they shouldn't be protected. Hence, we should start hunting them, and so on. Yeah. So that's the difficulty with all these rumors that there are, and this is also again where the affective dimension comes in. These are all stories that circulate in order to stir emotions and to change the supportive mood in society against wolves. Yeah. So this is part of the political dimension of emotions that's been going on in the last 25 years now that we have wolves in Germany.
And that reminds me of we had an entire episode when we talked about the narratives, the built narratives, and that was unsurprisingly about the program of red wolves, protection of red wolves in the United States. And there was like the same arguments, or it is not, they're like hybrids, there's this, there's that, there's something else. And I spoke with a scientist who wrote an entire paper on how those narratives are being built and how they are then affecting whatever is going on. I just noticed I used the word affecting, which is just speaks to the to the thing that you're right. Like what I was when I was reading your book, and this is another sort of like a question. You also spoke with I think it was a hunter, but he was like a anti-wolf person, and he asked you a question like, "Oh, are you this wolf maniac or something like that?" And what struck me was that once you guys finished a conversation, he was like, oh, I'm not anti-wolf. Oh no, I want this just like my way. So I almost feel like nobody, or at least there's fewer people who gonna be like, oh, I'm straight up anti-wolf and I hate the wolves. Maybe especially in the hunting community. But it's more like, no, I'm not anti-wolf, but here's how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, I mean, this has probably to do with, let's say, kind of the rules of how public debates go in our societies. Yeah, and this is also, I mean, something that is, in my view, sometimes misrepresented, even by some scientists. So the idea we sometimes get, and I know in places with a strong rewilding movement that might be the case in some ways, but you often get the impression that kind of the return of large predators, whether by themselves or through reintroduction programs, is kind of a project of a really small elite in the country. So just by a small group of people, kind of from urban areas, from the capital or wherever, and kind of the real people. Yeah. So kind of the majority of the people actually didn't want that, which is kind of a distortion of how things are, because we as a society, and also the majority of society, at least I'm kind of speaking in Germany in particular, but also for other countries, we have decided as a society that we would value biodiversity. And that within that concept of biodiversity, we also value each species, just because kind of we give them an existential right to exist, basically. And we say that that's good, and we have extirpated many species, and now we want to do our best actually to make up for that past mistake and help them getting back. Yeah. So it's something that we as a majority society actually decided. It wasn't an elite project of some all-powerful conservation lobbyists in Brussels or wherever. Of course, there is lobbying going on, but from all sides. But what I want to say, it's been a project that was kind of agreed on by the majority of society, basically. And this is that something that we need to take into account when we talk about all this. It's because at the moment and in the recent years, we have, of course, more and more of these populist movements now who want to portray also, when it comes to wolves, that there is an elite that basically rules over us and over the majority of people, and that also is responsible for reintroducing wolves to the country. And that's part of a wider right-wing populist movement, of course, and they work with the topic of wolves again, because it's such an emotional topic. Yeah, so it's really difficult these days to really understand all these different levels of political conflicts that wolves are basically entangled in.
They're exploited. I feel like they're exploited in all that thing. And what you said about the society, I guess this is exactly where those such a dangerous divisions in the society come from. That okay, you say it's society, we decide like who is that society? Who decided that? I'm not me, no, not you. And this is where it all. Yeah. Thorsten, I have I made an observation while I was reading, in one of the chapters you were talking about how people were afraid of their grandchildren, that they're gonna be harmed by wolves and so on. And I don't know exactly why, but my impression was that there was different attitude to wolves depending on the age group. Was that something that you observed? And if so, like, what were the differences between, like, were the older people had different attitude toward wolves?
Yeah, so this was kind of a series of interviews I did in Rosenthal, actually, the place where I went to the kill site as well. And actually, I talked with a couple who were grandparents. I talked with a guy who was kind of like my age, kind of early 50s, and his daughter was also briefly there. She was kind of late teens or around 20 maybe. And of course, kind of when you look at those people who are actively engaged in this political debate about wolves, it's mostly people my age and older, which probably also has to do with the fact that a lot of people who are involved, they're hunters, and of course we still have that kind of age disparity in the hunting community, that there are a lot of older hunters. There are also younger ones now, but the people usually kind of involved in that, they are usually a little bit older. The interesting thing was then, when I spoke with the daughter of this activist there, she had a kind of a mixed feelings in regard to wolves. Because on the one hand, her dad was a hunter, her whole family and relations, neighbors, there were a lot of hunters in there. So she was raised in a hunting family. But then from school, she was exposed to more kind of scientific narratives about wolves. So she learned that to have quite a positive attitude towards wolves from school. But then the third thing was, and that was kind of what made the difference for her, is she had experience herself with wolves. She saw the sheep that were killed by wolves. And she told me that I know dead animals. I know how dead animals look like. Yeah, I know that from hunting, when my dad comes home and so on, or when I went hunting with my dad. So she knew that. But she said there's something different about when wolves kill. And this is something that I call the necroaesthetics, with this nice scientific term for it. So it's kind of the pattern of sensory experience that is so particular about wolf kill sites. Yeah, in German, the word for it is it's called a riss, a rupture. And what wolves do is they rip apart. So this is part of how they kill. And of course, this is very different from how we in our days now experience animal death, if we experience it at all. Because what happened in our societies is that in the last 100 years, we have tried more and more actually to exclude animal death from sight. So it's usually put out of sight. It's even put to particular places, like slaughterhouses, for example. It's put in the hand of specialists, like kind of butchers, for example. Yeah, so we removed it more and more, so that even in the countryside these days, I would claim that most people actually don't have much experience with animal death and killing animals anymore. Yeah, apart from very few, like hunters, for example. And of course, I mean, we have also sanitized animal death, also because of developments of animal welfare and so on. Yeah, so it's all about, if you have to kill animals, which we agreed as a society is something that we allow for food and other certain purposes, then it must be done in an ethical way. It must be clean and really quick and so on, without much suffering. And of course, that's always been an ideal. I mean, we know the stories from slaughterhouses. We know that this ideal is not necessarily part of the everyday work practices there. We also know that there's a lot of suffering and violence going on in hunting. Not every shot is really the single clean shot that you want to do. But generally, we have this ideal in our heads that this is how animal death should look like. And then we come to a wolf kill site. Yeah, and we see all these ripped apart animals, maybe some of them even alive still. And it looks like, just like one shepherd told me, it looks like a bomb had exploded. And of course, we are not used to that kind of death and that kind of killing. And of course, in comparison to what we're used to, it looks really cruel. And therefore, we have strong emotional reactions to it. But what we don't see is that it's quite an artificial situation that we created in the first place. And it's also an idealized situation, which not always looks like we want to, but at least this is how we want it to be. So what the wolves bring back basically is this old aesthetic basically of death and killing, which we thought we had left behind. And now we've become really sensitive to these things. Yeah. So we don't have the stomach anymore for these pictures that wolves create near our villages where the sheep pastures are. And this is one of the biggest issues, actually, I think, what drives people's negative attitudes towards wolves. Yeah. So even the daughter of this activist, who was raised in the school with these positive scientific narratives of wolves and their role in the ecology of all, even for her, it was hard to stomach kind of the sight of these suffering and dead sheep. So this is one of the main questions, actually, because this will always be part of coexistence. Yeah. I mean, we might manage to improve herd protection in the long run and have lesser incidences, but the wolves will also develop, and there will always be incidences where protection is not 100% going well. The shepherd might have done a small mistake, the wolves have found it and got in. So these incidents, these wolf kills, they will always be a part of coexistence. So what we need to learn, I think, in the long term is that living with wolves demands a certain kind of resilience, emotional resilience to sites like this. Yeah. So not thinking that this type of killing animals is something unnatural. Yeah. And some would even say this is positively evil what they do. But just to see it is, well, this is how predators hunt and kill. Yeah, it's basically nature. Yeah, we might not like it, but we have to deal with it.
I think there's also kind of like an expectation of how the animal should behave and what it should, again, you had this story, and just for all the folks, I really recommend that book, because there's like a ton of like a real stories, and they make you think, at least they made me think, where two hunters were filming interaction with wolves. They see the wolves on the edge of the forest, and the conversation was half jokingly, but it was like, oh, it's not natural. Oh, it's not like the expectation of what is natural. And then, when I was reading that and knowing about the wolves, what I know, my thought was like, how is it not natural? Like, that wolf is interacting with you, this big ape, which is like maybe a little bit curious. What like, how come you can, authoritatively say like, oh, it's not natural? Like, well, it just happened, therefore it is natural, right? So this is this expectation that, oh, this is how the wolves should behave, and when they not behave the way we expect, there's like, oh, they're hybrids, they're this, they're that, they're something else.
Exactly. And this is also kind of one of the biggest problems, and unfortunately it's a problem where science actually contributed to most of the misunderstanding. So kind of what I argue there in that context, actually, also, and why I find this so interesting, this story, is that there is this understanding of wild animals in this old style thinking, kind of the dichotomy between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom, that we are kind of special and exceptional, and that the natural reaction of wild animals to humans would be to be scared of humans and to be shy and to basically to run away from humans, which is partly true. Some colleagues of mine, some wolf biologists from Norway, they did some a series of experiments, also in Germany and I think in Sweden too, where they tried to have experiments about what happens when humans and wolves meet. And they used GPS-colored wolves actually to find out where they were, and then kind of had a team of 2 people trying to find them and approach them and provoke a meeting. Yeah. The problem was that the experiments almost never worked because they could never see a wolf. It was long before they could find the wolf. The wolves had already sensed them and were off. Yeah. So in a way, wolves behave quite similar to lynx, actually. And then even kind of talking with people who have 25 years of experience of living with wolves in Eastern Germany, hardly any one of them has ever seen a wolf. Yeah. And this is reality. This is what coexistence for most people who don't have sheep, how coexistence look like. They're not there. Yeah, they will never see a wolf really in real life. They are still present, yeah, in terms of these affective qualities, yeah. So you still feel them around, yeah, but you will actually never meet them. This is the standard of coexistence. It's actually quite boring for most people. This is also the reason why most people in wolf country they don't really care about wolves, because it doesn't affect them in any way. Yeah, they don't have anything to do. They're not standing in your front garden all the time or come to beg for food or anything. Mostly they're out of sight. Yeah, and you don't need to think about them. Of course, it's different for when you are a hunter or when you are a sheep farmer. But for the majority of people, even in the countryside, they're just not there. Yeah, and this is something that we shouldn't forget. So all the impressions that we have from the media, from social media, that everything is geared towards conflict, this does not really represent what's really happening on the ground. Apart from villages like the one that I just described, where it's been a conflict, where there were continuous attacks, often more than 10 attacks every year for 10 years, basically. But then you have to ask, so why has that happened? Yeah, why was the situation there so difficult? Why was there so much conflict? Why did the wolves manage to kill so many animals year after year? And as I explained earlier, is when I came to the site and one part of the pasture wasn't fenced at all, this was the main driver of the continued conflict. All these years, and I think you mentioned it in this other podcast with Johnny Hansen as well, the problem was they didn't want to fence properly. Yeah, they didn't want to accept the wolves in their region. They wanted to have a wolf-free zone. They said, well, we have sheep here, we can't have wolves, therefore the wolves have to go. Yeah, I don't fence off my pasture. Yeah, even though there are, of course, compensation programs for killed animals, and there are programs to finance the fences. It's always changing depending on the federal state, but it's up to 100%. They even might get help from a wolf conservation NGO, actually, to build the fence or to maintain the fence. So there's so many things they could do, but they don't want to. Yeah, and this has driven the whole conflict over many years until finally the lead wolf of the pack died naturally after more than 10 years. And then kind of the attacks stopped. But I've just read in the news that the attacks actually started again this year now, with a different pack now. So it seems like they still don't fence properly there. So and this is the tragedy of the whole conflict. You could actually do a lot if there weren't all these politics involved.
Yeah. Listen, I think that your argument is that a lot of problems with the wolf management is that the wolf management is a lot about emotions and about these affects and the atmospheres, and those management strategies are not taking that into the account. So I want to bring that a little into the current events, not so current, but at the moment it is like another stage or another act of process of lowering the protection status of wolves in Europe, from moving them from Annex 4 to Annex 5. We spoke about this at length on the podcast. I wrote a blog about it, etc., etc. So I'm not going to be repeating myself here. Long story short, wolves will be not strictly protected, will be just protected, which will give some flexibility in management. And of course, there's a big outcry. I think that's the only word I can use from environmental NGOs. And what's your take on this? Is that the right move that will help to address those, emotional aspects of it? Even though we know that probably hunting is not the greatest way of um, preventing the attacks, because you get more of the wolves that are dispersing because the packs are getting disrupted, etc., etc. But where I sit, I feel like this will go the long way, or at least some way, towards addressing those emotional aspects of wolf management. So I'm curious where you sit on this issue.
I'm a bit critical with this whole move. And in particular, I'm critical, let's say, as a scientist, because I don't appreciate how Ursula von der Leyen kind of pushed through this whole project against scientific evidence, basically. And I know, among the wolf scientists, I think there was just a paper published about 2 weeks ago about the continued recovery of wolf and the success story. And that where the European population kind of doubled in the last 10 years or so. Yes, it's a success story. Yeah, so no doubt about that. But the problem, of course, is that when you look into different parts of the country or different parts of Europe, then it's a much more diverse picture that you get. Yeah, so it might be an overall success story, yes, but when you look to Norway, Sweden, Finland, it's not a success story at all. It's actually going down, basically. When you look at Switzerland, they've just introduced the most massive wolf management program, culling program ever in the country. So
20% or something, is it?
Yeah, at least. But in some areas, it's basically they get rid of whole wolf packs, basically, too. So there is a certain tendency in several countries now that wolf coexistence is to be interpreted as kind of the minimum population. Yeah, and the minimum population is usually dictated more or less by certain stakeholders that have a really strong lobbying power in Brussels, mainly farmers' association phase, farmers' unions, landowners, and so on. And it's an increasing trend. And we have the same in Germany, basically. And this is something that is slightly worrying me about kind of the overall picture and the overall success story. Because that recent article by John Dinnell and 30 others basically says that one of the most important factors actually for that recovery was the protective status of wolves. Yeah, and it's exactly that is now most probably going to be lowered if they get through. So it will be, from now on, it would probably be much more difficult. And when you look at a country like Germany, yes, we have wolves, and they have been returning for 25 years, but almost exclusively to the east and to northern Germany. There are hardly any wolf packs in southern Germany and in central Germany. They're still in my native federal state here in Baden-Württemberg. We don't have a single pack, and this is where the Black Forest is. Yeah, one of the biggest forested areas that we have. But still, after all these years, not a single pack. Yeah, Bavaria, just a very few. They could have many more. So what happens to these still wolf-free regions that we have in Europe? Same with France. Yeah, France has a wolf population, but more than 90% of that is in the southeastern area of the country, in the Alpine region. The rest of the country, still no wolves, yeah, apart from kind of the occasional wolf wandering through. So I really would be careful in kind of painting a really positive picture of the immediate future now. And also because what these articles do not talk about is that the connectivity of subpopulations within Europe. Because what we have seen in recent years is that we have anti-migration fences going up in several countries, and we have African swine fever fences going up in several countries. Yeah. So when you look at the wolf population in Germany, you see there is a fence on the German-Danish border, shutting that off. There are 2 fences along the German-Polish border. There's an anti-migration fence at the Polish-Belarusian border. Within Eastern Germany, it's crisscrossed by African swine fever fences everywhere, sometimes even fencing in whole wolf packs. So we have fences going up in Europe everywhere, basically destroying all these corridors that wolves had in order to feed into each other's genetic pool, basically. And the same with Finland and the Russian border, where the big fence is going up now. So we have fences everywhere. So this is something that we need to take into account as well when we think of this success story. But in regard to your question about what the effects are of this move in terms of kind of emotion management or affect management, we know from Sweden, for example, or Norway, that when you introduce wolf hunting, it doesn't have any effect on people's attitude on wolves. The hunters are still as opposed to wolves as they were before the cull. It's something. It's not enough because even then, you have to read the phase position paper on wolves, and then you see what the long-term plan is and what the lobbying campaign is about. It's about lowering the protective status of wolves. It's about kind of getting more permissions to cull individual wolves. But then the next step is to have a quota hunt, like in Sweden. And then you have a normal hunt with open and closed seasons. And in the end, you basically have a hunt that is not as much different from hunting any other kind of animal, just like roe deer or wild boar or whatever. And this is the end aim, basically, of the hunting association, both in Europe, but also in Germany and many other European countries. So they want the wolf to be just like any other game, under their responsibility, not someone else's responsibility. And this is kind of the main struggle that's been going on among recreational hunters in Europe for decades, basically. It's the question or the struggle of power over wild animals. Because in Germany, for example, hunting was an aristocratic privilege. No one else was allowed to hunt. So they were the only ones who were responsible and in power to decide what happens to wild animal populations. And they were the ones who could decide what happens to wolves. And they want that power again. But now conservation has stepped in. And of course, it's not in their power anymore because they are protected species. Now it's hunters against the state, in the struggle for power. So in that sense, I don't think that just lowering the protective status now and maybe introducing a little bit of hunting will change anything in their attitude. Because their attitude is wolves should be treated like normal game, and we should be empowered to kill them if we want to. And fact is, for most recreational hunters in Europe, they have a really negative attitude towards wolves. Yeah, we all know it, and I don't think that this will change anything. Yeah, because this negative attitude towards wolves is, at least when I speak to Germany, where I've done research with hunters for about 10 years now, it's part and parcel of their relationship to other game animals. Predators are always seen and historically been seen as the enemy of the animals one cares for and feels responsible for. And that's a fundamental conflict that you can't get rid of by changing the legislation.
Yeah. I got this from, not word for word, from one of, I don't think it was in your book, or maybe, but maybe some other book, that I came to the conclusions, like I was always showing and thinking about similarities between hunters and farmers in the society, and some conflicts and how they're treated and how they're positioned, let's say, in the society. But recently, I'm coming to the conclusion that that fundamentally hunters' attitude is incompatible with farmers' attitude, because for a farmer, wolf is an enemy, and I feel like for a hunter, the wolf is a brother, so to say. And to your point, it's like, I'm making air quotes, are the real hunters, or is it like a kind of like a borderline farming, because we have all those game animals and we need to take care of them. It's pushing the hunter's attitude towards being like almost like a farmer of those wild game, and therefore the wolf is not anymore sort of like an animal that does the same thing and have the same skills and is this, quote unquote brother, but rather this is an enemy of our game, and so on and so forth.
Tommy, I'm afraid this view of wolves as the brothers of hunters, that might be kind of a nostalgic view inspired by Northern American natives. At least it's not what happened in most parts of Europe in history. It's never been considered an equal or a brother or anything like it. So, I mean, this is about kind of, especially kind of German history, but seeing that Germany was also spread through the Prussian Empire over Poland up to the Baltic states on the one hand, and then the Habsburg Empire going up to Hungary and former Yugoslavia and so on. So it's really kind of an old hunting tradition that covers many parts of Europe. And in that hunting tradition, it was, as I said, hunting was an aristocratic privilege. So the hunters were themselves from the aristocracy. And although they didn't own their game animals, but they still felt they were part of their land. So it had to do with the conception of land, of aristocratic land ownership. And for them, I mean, what they were interested in were especially the red deer and also kind of the wild boar and so on. And of course, they had this responsibility, but also the right to harvest these populations of these game species. And the job of a hunter at that time was two things. The one thing was to organize these hunts for the aristocracy, and the other one was to protect the game population from human poaching and from predators. And this is the reason why the aristocracy wanted to get rid of wolves and bears and lynx, and all these extermination campaigns had that aim of protecting your game. Yeah. So from that point of view, it's always been an enemy for hunters. For them, it was the so-called Raubwild, kind of the predatory game. And this were always considered really negative. Yeah, you could do with them. So hunting ethics didn't really apply to this kind of game. You could do with them whatever, and we knew the way they hunted them was really cruel sometimes. Yeah, the same is with foxes. How they treated foxes, it's also similar. So it's always been part of the European hunting traditions in that sense. But the other thing is about the influence of farmers and farmers' relationship to wild animals. And this has also been a case. So, for example, wolf hunting was actually one of the very few that were not exclusively reserved for the aristocracy, but everyone could kill a wolf. And of course, the other people who killed wolves were farmers. Yeah, and of course they couldn't go hunting with a weapon and so on, so they used the most cruel methods like poisoning and traps. Yeah, what we have now in Germany in the hunting community is that there is quite a large percentage also of farmer hunters in the hunting community, and so we actually have a mix of these traditional hunters' attitudes towards animals, and then the farmers' attitudes towards animals. Yeah, and I mean, hunters had always had to accommodate farmers because their game was actually damaging the fields and so on. But now we have both. And the problem with wolves is that they have a negative reputation from both sides. Yeah, for let's say red deer is positive with the hunters, but negative with the farmers. With wolves, it's negative from both sides. And this is what makes it really difficult, because there's no positive relationship to wolves, either in hunting or in farming communities. And this is one of the major problems that I see actually for our current coexistence problems. Because I hear a lot of colleagues, also social scientists, who say, well, we need to pay more attention to the voice of the rural communities, of the hunters and farmers, because they are the one affected, which is true. Yeah, all these things about compensation programs and helping them to cope with coexistence, this is all true. But what is also true is that we shouldn't forget that these are the two groups that actually extirpated wolves in the first place. And when you talk with them, maybe the same attitude, if not a similar attitude, is still present in the contemporary communities of hunters and farmers. It's still negative. So if you just wanted to do what they want to do, you would have wolf-free zones, basically, just like they do in Norway. So it's really a balancing act of hearing them on the one hand and supporting them, but also kind of still protecting wolves, because they have a really strongly negative attitude in some parts of the community that have very powerful political lobbies.
I would love to be able to say, Thorsten, that you burst my bubble about hunting community, but you didn't. I'm well aware. I'm well aware of and I'm also well aware how slippery slope it is to talk about real hunters or real hunting while talking about something like almost no hunters do. And
unfortunately, I have to say, kind of, when you research wolves and hunters, it brings out the worst in hunters. Actually, from our previous conversation, that I've done a lot of research on hunting and also about all other kinds of things. And we talk about hunting ethics, also about the positive use of these old rituals and so on. But really, when it comes to wolves, you really see that there's a need in the hunting community actually to critically reflect on their relationship with with large predators. It's an issue. And I think it's something they should deal with, because it seems to be from an old world for me somehow. It's okay if you're an aristocrat and you want to protect your game. If you live in the highlands on a game farm and you protect your red deer from wolves. But if you consider that it's not just about animals, but it's also about the whole ecology of our landscapes. That it's about bigger things. It's not just about personal interests. but about the bigger picture. And therefore, I think they need to work on that. So shout out to Face in Brussels. I think this is really something that you should consider, especially since we in our last podcast we talked about that killing animals always has an effect on the hunters themselves. Yeah, so we have to ask kind of what kind of hunter are you when you hunt like this? And I would also say, what kind of hunter are you if you can only see wolves as a problem?
That's it. That's it. And yeah, shout out to Face and shout out to Dave Scanlon, who was on the podcast many times as well. I feel like Face is a little bit powerless versus those big hunting organizations. I wish they had more leverage over them, but I think that Face is tiny compared to national hunting organizations. And I was on the conference and I heard firsthand one of the, let's say, top folks in one of the big, if not the biggest, European hunting organization, no names named, who was from his speaking place, were saying like, oh yeah, we are all for more biodiversity and less predators. And I was just like fell spine, like, dude, like, bro, do you even know what biodiversity is? I was just like, oh god. Anyway, that's probably a topic for another entire podcast. Thorsten, I just want to wrap this up with a question for you. You're arguing for more affect guided thinking in wolf management and with managing wolf relationships. We established that you are not a fan of managing those relations in terms of like allowing a little bit of hunting, because that doesn't do much good. So what in practical terms, in your view, would that affect guided thinking or affect guided management would look like, and what does it mean?
Just to clarify one thing, I mean, I also think that one day we will have kind of a more regular type of hunting in regard to wolves. It's just that I think that it's a little bit too soon right now, because we're still at the very beginning, actually, especially when we look at different regions of Europe. Yeah, so it's not that I would not be would not see hunting being possible in the future. I guess at some level we would need to talk about it. And on another level, of course, I think you were talking about the situation in the Netherlands, for example, with Johnny. What we have in Germany, and what is particular seems to be a problem in the Netherlands, is how to deal with problematic wolves, the ones that are habituated to humans. And of course, there's always this possibility of derogation, getting individual permits to shoot individual wolves. And in Germany, at least, the habituated wolves that we had, they were also killed. So that seemed to work. And I think this is something that's not regular hunting, but I think it's part of wolf management somehow. You need to deal with these kinds of situations. Yeah. But if you need proper hunting or culling, quota hunting in any way, I think that's a question for the future, because the population is still too unstable in my terms. But I'm not. Ecologists might disagree. Affect-guided thinking. So what I mean by that? What I mean is that wolf management, but also a large part of the scientific community, they are all about rationality. So it's all about discussing facts and separating facts from fiction or fairy tales. And it's all about looking kind of dispassionately on this topic of wolves. Of course, the problem is that, as we know, it's all full of emotions. And when you tell people now, just leave aside the emotions, we just have a rational conversation, you might be able to try that, but it will always come through. Yeah. And it will always disrupt your conversations. Yeah. So you can't just kind of leave emotions on the side. You have to acknowledge them in some way. Now, the worst thing that you can do that is that you're actually driven by these emotions, as wolf managers. And this is also kind of a certain tendency now I see that if someone has a worry or a concern, that you need to take them seriously. And taking them seriously means that you view emotions as being authentic and natural. Something that just happens without particular reason. And when someone is worried, you have to acknowledge that and you have to support that person. And what that leaves out is that, in particular when it comes to wolf coexistence, is none of these emotions are just there by themselves. So we all live in a societal context. We all live with wolves. There are affective dynamics everywhere. And this is how our emotions emerge and form and develop. This is what influences also kind of how intense the emotional responses are. And so we need to ask kind of what contributes to that emotion. Why are you having this now? Who is contributing to it? Is it just the wolves or is there more going on? And when we tease that out, we might also see, there is emotion or an affect management going on from all sides. The pro-wolf side tries to manage emotions. The wolf management tries to do it. The politician try to do it. The shepherds try to do it. So we need to acknowledge the political dimensions of emotions. And this is what I mean is affect-guided. It's not affect-driven. So we're not just blindly following the ones who are the most concerned or the most scared, but actually we say, okay, let's have a look at your emotions and see what is actually at stake there and what contributes to it. And then we can have a better discussion because we also know what kind of the political dimensions are and if it really needs to be that way. So is fear just a basis for coexistence with wolves? Does it have to be fear? If we just accept the statements of some people that they have fear, then there's nothing to work on, unless you remove the wolves. But the point is, we don't just have emotions, we also deal with emotions. So we're not powerless. We can also work on them. Then this is what I earlier termed emotional resilience. So we need also to discuss as a society, what are the emotions involved in coexistence? What is necessary? What is perhaps also fear-mongering? And what kind of resilience do we need? I mentioned in the epilogue of the book, this queasy feeling, for example. Which is not the best translation, but there is no English word for it. In German, it's the mulmige Gefühl. Mulmig. It's one of my favorite words. It's kind of, it's not being scared, but it's kind of the beginning of something arising. So you feel uncomfortable, but it's also a visceral feeling. So you feel it in your guts a little bit. But you don't know exactly what's happening. And I was talking to a woman in Eastern Germany where they had 25 years of wolves now. She had never seen one in her whole life. But she described this one scene where she went into the woods before Christmas with her husband and her 2 kids, and they were trying to get a Christmas tree. And then they came to this place with the trees, and they saw tracks on the snowy ground of several wolves. And of course, they didn't know how fresh the tracks were. But suddenly something changed. They didn't know, are the wolves still around? Is there something? And they just kind of grabbed their kids and they thought, well, it may be safer to go back. And the kids also suddenly changed and thought, something's not quite right. Why are we going back? Why are you taking us up on your arms? And there was nothing happened there. There was probably no wolves around. But this was just kind of, there's this little feelings that you sometimes get. Yeah, so I call it a sometimes feeling. And this is something that is part of coexistence with wolves. Yeah, sometimes when you go into the woods, you feel a little bit queasy. It happened to me too, where when I was walking in wolf territory in the evening, it's getting dark. Sometimes you wonder when you are in a dark forest. Yeah, you wonder. But then also, I had a queasy feeling when I encountered a group of wild boar. So yeah, there is some emotional level, I think, that we just need to be able, to live with when we want to live with wolves or with lynx or with bears even. Because, I mean, they are always potentially, at least, they could be a threat. Yeah, we know that for us humans, wolves are not really a threat in Europe. There's been hardly any cases at all, none in Germany. But there's a feeling, yeah? And some people say we don't want to have that feeling, not even this small, queasy feeling. We don't want that. We don't accept it. But I don't think that in this current world that this is an option. Yeah, because when we look at the broader picture, it's not just wolves returning. Yeah, it's also wild boars returning to Berlin and raccoons returning. And so there's so many animals who close in on us, and we have to learn to deal with them because we can't kill them all. It's not an option.
And, I think that anyone who lives in a city, they have a queasy feeling when they need to turn into the unlit alley and just move somewhere else. Folks, living with wolves affects feelings and sentiments in human-wolf coexistence. Once again, go in the description of this show. Get yourself a book. You won't regret. Thorsten, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me and for giving me the chance to speak about the book with really good questions from your side. So it's always nice to speak with you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
And before you go, since you stick to the end of this show, then first and foremost, thank you so much for listening and for watching. And if you enjoy what I do here, and I presume you do since you listen to the very end, you should subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description of the show, newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com. So get in there and you will get notifications not only about the latest episodes of the podcast, but also about everything else that is happening in the conservation and science world.